The church smelled of fresh lilies and polished wood, the kind of scent meant to promise new beginnings. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, spilling across white ribbons tied carefully along each pew. Clara Bennett stood in the small dressing room behind the sanctuary, staring at her reflection as if it belonged to someone else. Her wedding dress fit perfectly. That was the problem. It meant this was real. In less than an hour, she would walk down the aisle and marry Edward Collins, a kind, steady man who had courted her for over a year. He was respected in town, patient, thoughtful, and certain about her in a way that made everyone say she was lucky. Lucky. She lifted her veil and studied her eyes. They looked calm, too calm. A soft knock came at the door. "Miss Clara," it was Mrs. Davenport, the pastor's wife. "There's something for you." Clara turned. "Now." "It just arrived. The postboy said it couldn't wait." Her heart gave a strange, quick beat. "A letter?" "Yes." Clara forced a smile. "Bring it in." Mrs. Davenport entered holding a single envelope, worn at the corners, the paper slightly yellowed as if it had traveled far and waited long. There was no return address on the front. Just her name, written in a familiar hand she hadn't seen in years. Her breath stopped. She knew that handwriting. She would have known it anywhere. "Thank you," she whispered. When the door closed, the room felt smaller, quieter, as though time itself had paused to watch her. Her fingers trembled as she turned the envelope over. The seal had already been broken, likely by the post office during forwarding. It bore stamps from distant cities and dates that made no sense. Dates from 3 years ago. 3 years. She slid the letter out slowly. "Clara, if this reaches you, then I've been given more mercy than I deserve. I don't know when you'll read this, or if you ever will. But I couldn't leave without telling you the truth." The words blurred as tears flooded her vision. It was Daniel Hayes, the man who had once promised her forever beneath the old oak tree by Miller's Creek. The man who had left for the war and never come back. The man she had buried in her heart when the telegram arrived saying he was missing and presumed dead. Her knees weakened and she sank into the chair. "I was captured during the second winter. We were cut off, taken across the border. They told us no one would know. For a long time I believed I would die there. I tried writing once, but they burned the letters in front of us. This one I've hidden for months. A guard said he'd try to send it if he could. I don't know if he will. If you think me gone, I understand. If you've moved on, I pray you've found happiness. But if there is still a place for me in your heart, hold on to it. I am coming home. I will walk back into our town no matter how long it takes. I love you. I never stopped." "Daniel," Clara pressed the paper to her lips as a sob escaped her. 3 years. 3 years too late. The church bells began to ring faintly in the distance, signaling that guests were arriving. Laughter floated through the open window. Life moving forward. Her mind reeled backward. She remembered the last day she saw him, standing on the train platform in his uniform, grinning like he was heading toward adventure instead of danger. He had pressed a small silver locket into her hand. "Don't let anyone else steal your heart." He'd teased gently. She had swatted his arm. "You come back and take it yourself." He kissed her then, a kiss full of youth and certainty. And then he was gone. For months, letters had come regularly. Mud, stained paper, cramped handwriting, stories about cold nights and missing home. She had answered each one faithfully, counting the days. Then the letters stopped. Then came the telegram. Missing, presumed dead. She had waited a year before she allowed herself to mourn. Another year before she accepted that hope was crueler than grief. Edward had entered her life quietly. He never tried to replace Daniel. He simply stood beside her. He helped her mother with repairs after her father passed. He walked her home from church, He never pushed. When he proposed, it wasn't with grand gestures. "I can't promise you fireworks," he had said gently, "but I can promise you steadiness." She had said yes because steadiness felt safe. And now this letter lay in her hands like a spark dropped in dry grass. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Clara, her mother's voice. "It's time. Time." She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her bouquet, hidden among white roses. "I'll be right there," she said, though her voice sounded distant. As she stepped into the hallway, she felt as if she were walking through two lives at once. One leading toward the altar, the other pulling her backward into memory. The sanctuary was full. Friends, neighbors, familiar faces smiling warmly. At the front stood Edward in his dark suit, his expression calm but bright with anticipation. He looked at her as though she were the only person in the room. Her heart twisted. The music began. Each step down the aisle felt heavier than the last. Halfway there, her gaze drifted to the church doors at the back. They were closed. Of course they were closed. Daniel was gone. The letter could be old. It could be false hope. He might never return. She reached the altar. Edward took her hands gently. "You look beautiful," he whispered. She searched his eyes for doubt, for suspicion that something was wrong. But there was only trust. The pastor began to speak. Words about love, about commitment, about faithfulness in uncertainty. Faithfulness in uncertainty. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet. When the pastor asked if anyone objected, the silence was absolute. And then the church doors creaked open. Every head turned. A man stood there, framed by sunlight, thin, weathered, uniform worn and faded, a small scar cutting across his brow. Clara's breath left her body. Daniel, he looked older, carved by hardship, but unmistakably him. His eyes found hers instantly, as if they had never stopped searching. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Edward's grip faltered slightly. "Clara," he whispered. Daniel took one hesitant step forward. "I'm sorry," he said, voice rough. "I didn't know." The world narrowed to the space between them. 3 years of grief collided with the living proof standing at the door. Clara felt as though she might collapse under the weight of choice. Edward released her hands slowly. "Is that him?" he asked quietly. She nodded, tears spilling freely now. Daniel stopped halfway down the aisle, uncertainty etched across his face. "I came as soon as I could," he said. "I didn't know about today. I went to your house, and they told me." His voice broke. Clara stepped back from the altar. Gasps filled the church. Her mother rose halfway from her seat, hands trembling. Edward's face had gone pale, but he did not look angry. He looked heartbroken. "I read your letter," Clara said softly. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "Then it reached you. 3 years too late." He nodded once, pain flickering there. The pastor cleared his throat awkwardly, clearly unsure whether to continue or vanish. Clara turned to Edward. "I never stopped loving him," she said honestly. The words shattered the fragile peace in the room. Edward inhaled slowly, absorbing the blow with quiet dignity. "I think I always knew that part of you was waiting," he said. "I just hoped time would change it." Tears slid down her cheeks. "You deserve someone whose heart is whole. And you deserve the truth of yours." He stepped back. A collective breath seemed to release from the crowd. Clara turned and walked down the aisle, not toward the exit alone, but toward Daniel. When she reached him, she hesitated only a second before touching his face, as if confirming he was real. "You're alive," she whispered. "I promised I'd come home." She laughed through tears. "You're 3 years late." "I know." Behind them, the church buzzed with shock and whispers, but it felt distant. Edward remained at the altar, watching them with quiet acceptance. Clara looked back at him one last time. "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded gently. Be happy, Clara. Daniel stepped aside to let her pass through the doors first, as he always had. Outside, the air felt different, charged, uncertain, alive. They stood facing each other on the church steps. I thought you were gone, she said. I almost was. He told her in broken pieces about captivity, about escape, about months spent traveling back across borders and towns, taking whatever work he could to move closer to home. He had imagined surprising her on an ordinary day. He hadn't imagined this. I never married, she said softly. I was afraid you had. I almost did. He swallowed hard. If you choose him, I won't blame you. She studied his face, the lines carved by suffering, the hope barely daring to live in his eyes. 3 years ago, she said, I gave you my heart. I buried it when they said you were dead, but I never gave it to anyone else. Emotion broke across his features. I don't know what comes next, she admitted. Neither do I. She slipped the bouquet from her hands and let it fall gently onto the steps. But I know I'm not walking back into that church. He let out a shaky breath that turned into a laugh. Then where are you walking? She took his hand. Home, she said. They didn't run away in dramatic fashion. They simply walked down the dirt road together, side by side, as townsfolk watched in stunned silence. Behind them, the church bells rang uncertainly, then stopped. In the days that followed, the town buzzed with gossip. Some called it scandalous, others called it fate. Edward left town for a while, accepting a job in the neighboring county. He wrote Clara a short note before he left. You followed your heart. That's braver than most. I hope he spends the rest of his life earning the place he still holds in it. Daniel did. Healing wasn't immediate. Nightmares still woke him. Guilt still haunted Clara for the pain caused that day. But love, tested by absence and time, proved stronger than either of them expected. One evening, months later, Daniel led her back to Miller's Creek. The old oak tree still stood, branches stretching wide as ever. He knelt, not with polished rings or grand speeches, but with a small band he had crafted himself from silver earned during his travels. I don't have much, he said, but I have every tomorrow I can give. Clara smiled through tears. Don't be late this time, she teased softly. He laughed. I won't. When they married, it wasn't in a crowded church filled with expectation. It was beneath that oak tree, with only close friends and family present. No lilies, no elaborate ribbons, just truth. As Clara stood there, hand in Daniel's, she realized something profound. The letter had not arrived too late. It had arrived exactly when it needed to, on the day she was about to choose safety over love. It had forced her to face what her heart had never released. And sometimes, she thought, the bravest thing a person can do isn't walking down the aisle. It's turning around when destiny knocks 3 years too late, and choosing love anyway.